Hello and welcome to the RISE UP Buttercup Podcast, where we have one mission: to empower women across the world.
And I'm saying no way, I'm going my own way, and you can't stop me, 'cause I'm loving myself, oh no way, this is my own way, and you can't stop me, 'cause I'm loving myself.
Hello, my friend. Welcome to another episode of the RISE UP Buttercup Podcast. If you're new here, my name's Amy Gerhartz. I am a coach. I'm also your host for the podcast. And today I want to talk about managing the overwhelm and give you some tips and tools today so that you can start to manage the overwhelm in your own life. Now, why do I want to talk about this? First of all, I have seen this be a consistent repeat theme with pretty much all of the clients that I've worked with, particularly a lot of the clients recently that I've worked with. And I don't know if it's this time of year, going into summer, kids getting out of school, work demands, personal life demands, but so many people I've worked with, in fact, I was just speaking with a client yesterday about this, have been struggling with overwhelm. So I thought, okay, I want to give you some tips today, things that I would teach you if you were my client, or some starting tips if you were my client, to give you tools to manage the overwhelm in your own life. So when it comes to overwhelm, there are a few important things that I've learned. First of all, overwhelm is a feeling, right? And you can feel it, right? You can feel that sense of, I am overwhelmed. I am feeling overwhelmed right now. What I've noticed is that overwhelm as a feeling is not a standalone feeling. It's not like I'm just overwhelmed by itself, because human beings were capable of feeling many different things at the same time. So in my experience, overwhelm is a feeling that is usually attached to other feelings as well. Feelings like stress, feelings like anxiety and panic and shutdown and paralysis, right? Like I can't move. These other feelings that start to come along with overwhelm. Now, here's the thing that I've learned. In fact, I learned this in therapy and it's been so beneficial. All of these feelings are real feelings, but they aren't always necessarily based on fact. Now, is it a fact that you may have a lot of things going on in your life right now that is causing the feeling of overwhelm? Yes. But those other feelings of spinning out of control and panic and paralysis and potentially even some alternative feelings like I'm a failure or I can't do this that might creep in, just because those feelings are there doesn't mean they're actually based on fact. So the feelings are being triggered by all of the different things you have going on in your life right now. So what I've started to learn is that, once again, overwhelm usually doesn't exist just by itself. There could be a lot of accompanying feelings that are coming up with the overwhelm. And if we can take a step back and look at everything from the big picture view, we're able to recognize whether these feelings are real feelings, they are real feelings, but whether they're actually based in fact, right? So the feeling of overwhelm, the feeling of being out of control, that feeling of I am out of control may not necessarily mean that you are out of control. It's just a feeling that comes along. Now, potentially you could be out of control, but it's important to take a step back to identify whether this is a feeling that is based off of fact, or if it's just a feeling by itself. So how do we do that? There's an NLP technique I spoke about in the last podcast episode about taking action, and it's called dissociation. So as I mentioned before, it's looking at the big picture. So taking a step back, taking a minute to pause. Now, the only way you can take a step back is what I just said, taking a minute in your life to pause. In fact, I'm going to take a minute here to pause to let you take a second to just step back and pause. Because when we are in that feeling of overwhelm and potentially panic and potentially stress and potentially anxiety and potentially shutdown, we're usually not allowing ourselves a second to pause. Right? So you're going to hear a lot of repeat themes over my podcast episodes because I think they're so important. taking a step to pause, then taking a step to dissociate or detach out from the situation to kind of look at the big picture. And you can do this a few different ways, as I spoke about in the last podcast episode. You can pretend that you are 30,000 feet above you watching you in your life. You can pretend that you are maybe outside of a house looking in and watching the events that are unfolding. You can pretend that you're watching your life up on a movie screen. There are thousands of NLP techniques out there that you can use. By the way, if you're new to NLP, that stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. So there are thousands of techniques that you can use to dissociate and detach and to take a minute to step back and look at the big picture, right? That's all we're doing with dissociation, is looking at the big picture. So once you take a step back, you can look at this feeling of overwhelm. You can assess the feeling of overwhelm. You can assess all of the other feelings that are coming along with it. And you could go back and ask that question: is this fact or is this just a feeling? Is this fact or is this just a feeling? And if you realize potentially that it's just a feeling, which honestly, most of my clients, myself included, do, because we tend to get in this state of all these feelings and we don't really take a step back to calm ourselves down. And we end up letting these feelings operate us as human beings versus taking a step back and logically looking at everything. But when you realize potentially that it's just a feeling and it's not fact, then you can start shifting that feeling. So a couple different things you can do. And one of my clients brought this up because we'd had another conversation with some books that I had recommended. And one book in particular by Brené Brown that I thought was a brilliant book was Rising Strong. And in Rising Strong, there's a phrase that Brené says, and it's "the story I'm telling myself is," which I think is such a brilliant phrase to use. And obviously crediting her, why reinvent the wheel? She came up with a perfect phrase here. The story I'm telling myself is. And now I'm going to recommend this phrase for you to use because why reinvent the wheel? It's a great phrase to use. So the story I'm telling myself is. And so when it comes to overwhelm, once you've dissociated or once you've first acknowledged that they're all feelings, overwhelm is a feeling. You've got all these other probably accompanying feelings. Maybe they're based off of real things. Maybe there are factual feelings. Maybe they're not factual feelings. You get to do that assessment and you get to detach out or dissociate out, look at the big picture, do an assessment of your feelings. And then you can ask that question of the story I'm telling myself is. So let's recap really quickly. You've got this feeling of overwhelm. It's more than likely accompanied by a lot of other feelings, and those feelings are very real feelings, but they may or may not be based on fact. So it's important to remember that feeling and fact do not always coexist together, right? So once you have done an assessment of your feelings after taking a step back and looking at the big picture, you can do that assessment of your feelings. And then you can start asking this question: what is the story I'm telling myself? Okay, well, the story I'm telling myself is that I'm out of control. The story I'm telling myself potentially might be that I can't do this. The story I'm telling myself might be I don't have enough time. It could be anything. I don't want to put any words into your mouth or make up the story for you, but take a minute to pause and just think about what's the story I'm telling myself that is fueling this overwhelm. I'm going to say that again. What is the story I'm telling myself right now that is fueling, adding flames to the fire of the overwhelm? And is that a real story? Is that real? Now, I'm not saying that you don't have a lot of things going on in your life. We all have so many things going on in our lives. In fact, we have all of this technology that is supposed to support us in getting more done. But I found that it actually causes my clients and myself to do more and more and more and more, right? So it's not actually supporting us when it comes to our emotions, when it comes to that overwhelm. So taking a step back, asking yourself, all right, what's the story I'm making up here? What's the story I'm telling myself? And which one of these feelings aren't actually fact? Which one of these feelings are not based in fact? And if you can start assessing that way, then you can start, as I said before, shifting that emotion of overwhelm, shifting that perspective on the tasks that you're doing. Because overwhelm, once again, is a feeling. And I want to be very careful how I say this because we don't consciously choose to feel overwhelmed, but I do believe we can consciously choose to feel something different once we bring an awareness in. And this is what a lot of NLP is. We can start to consciously shift our feelings, our patterns, our behaviors once we bring an awareness to them. So once you've brought an awareness to all of these feelings, right? Once you've stepped outside of yourself, you've looked at the big picture, you can then choose to feel something different. You can then choose to start focusing on something different. And you can do that by asking a series of questions. All right, I feel overwhelmed, which is causing me to feel panicked, which is causing me to feel stressed. So why am I stressed? What is it about this situation that is causing me to feel stressed? What is it about the tasks that I'm doing that are causing me to feel stressed and overwhelmed? Is it perhaps I've taken on too many things? Is it perhaps I'm doing things that aren't as important than other things? Is it perhaps that I'm trying to find this, work-life balance and trying to do so many things that I haven't really taken any time for myself? What is it for you? And you're only going to know by taking time to pause and take a step back and just ask those questions. What is it for me that's causing this overwhelm? And then how can I change those things that I'm doing so that I can create feelings of non-overwhelm, so that I can create more peace, more control, or a feeling of control, right? That I can create maybe calm. And another thing I like to do a lot with my clients, also with myself, and listener, I don't know if you're like me in this, but when I start to feel overwhelmed, it's more than likely because I'm so focused on the things that I'm doing and I'm not really focused on myself. I am so focused on the tasks that I have to do, the projects I've said yes to, the clients that I work with, the organizations I do workshops for, that I've stopped focusing on myself and who I want to be every single day. Now, once again, I want to make this very clear. I don't think anyone consciously chooses to feel stressed or overwhelmed. The majority of our feelings live and exist inside of our subconscious, so they happen automatically. But I do believe that when we bring that awareness, like I said before, I can choose to feel something different. I can choose to shift my focus to a different feeling and associate with that new feeling. You've heard dissociation and association. So when we detach and separate out, we can look at the big picture. And let's say I look at the big picture. I want to give you an example of this. Let's say I look at the big picture of my life and I realize I'm overwhelmed, feeling stressed, I'm feeling panicked because I've said yes to far too many tasks that I couldn't possibly complete in the time frame that I said I would complete them. So then I get to assess, all right, what gets to be trimmed out? What are the things that I don't really need to do right now? What are the things that I can let go of? What are the things that I'm prioritizing potentially incorrectly for me in my life? And then what's the feeling I want to create to then accomplish the remaining tasks or accomplish the remaining things that I want to do? What feeling do I want to channel? What feeling do I want to create so that I can get them done without the overwhelm? And that takes intentional focus of the mind and of our bodies to shift into that other feeling. Now, I don't want to make this sound easier than it is. It's not complicated, but it will take some effort. I don't want you to think that you can just snap your fingers and then all of your overwhelmed feelings are just going to disappear. It doesn't work like that. I wish that it did. But I do believe that you can snap your fingers and say, all right, now I'm going to focus on being calm. I'm going to put tools and systems in place to work on remaining calm. I'm going to tell myself every day that when I wake up, I get to be calm today. So whatever it is you want to create to replace the overwhelm, that's what you get to focus on. That is the feeling you get to intentionally focus on. And the more you focus on being calm, the more you focus on being centered, the more you focus on the type of person you want to be. I want to say that again. The more you focus on the type of person you want to be from a conscious space, the more you start to create that new belief system and pattern, which will override the overwhelm. Now, listener, this takes practice. This is why I work with clients one-on-one to really support them over time to create these new habits and new belief systems and to give them that emotional control so that they can accomplish the things they want to. So when it comes to you, what can you do today to support you in managing the overwhelm, in managing any other feelings that might be getting in the way? How can you apply these tools into your life? And I want to recap one more time. It's dissociating, stepping outside of yourself, looking at the big picture, taking a moment to pause is also very important, and then assessing all of those emotions and assessing whether they are feeling or fact. Sometimes they might be one and the same, but most of the time, the feelings that we get when we start spiraling out of control are not actually factual. The feeling of being out of control doesn't mean that you actually are. So just remind yourself of that. And then you can ask those questions. What's the story I'm telling myself right now? What am I turning into a bigger issue than it needs to be potentially, right? What am I seeing differently and how can I shift it? And then asking yourself that question of who do I want to be right now? And how do I shift my focus away from the overwhelm? How do I maybe sit with myself for a little while? How do I meditate and channel those feelings that I want to have instead? So when it comes to overwhelm, my friend, this is going to take practice. Once again, this is going to take effort from you, but I want you to know that it's manageable. And I have found these tools being incredibly beneficial for my life and for my clients' lives to support them in taking that overwhelm that usually starts really high up here and bringing it down to a much more manageable space. And then the next thing you can do, which I do all of the time, because just because I'm a coach doesn't mean I don't experience overwhelm or feelings that get out of control. Then what I do is every time I start finding myself ramping up into that feeling of stress and overwhelm, I use these tools again to refocus and bring myself back down, to shift focus and bring myself back down. So my friend, I hope this supports you today. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me anytime. You can go to ahigherwayofliving.com. You can download the free gifts that we have for you in the description. You can message me on all of the social media platforms. You can comment on this podcast episode. But above all else, I want you to remember that you are one of a kind and absolutely worth it. And I will see you next time.